Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we are looking at Mythic Bastionland, Before Into the Odd by Chris McDowell. This is the follow-up to Electric Bastionland, which is also the follow-up to Into the Odd, a very early OSR style game that ended up being very influential throughout a lot of role-playing games. One of the big twists between this and the previous version, Electric Bastionland, is that instead of being inside a big city, you are in a hex crawl. You are all playing Arthurian knights in a little bit of a homage to games like Pendragon. You are traveling the land, meeting rulers, finding new cities, investigating hexes for myths, which are these weird events that are happening across the landscape. You are seeking out seers to give you more information about where cool stuff is happening, and in general, serving the population and being noble knights. I'm actually playing in a campaign of Mythic Bastionland right now, so I have a lot of things to say about my experience and what I think works so well with this game. Before we start though, a shout out to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. All of the patrons get access to Maze Knights, which is a new role-playing game that I'm developing. Patrons get access also to the secret Discord, where we chat about game design and lots of other fun stuff. If you want to help support the channel, click on the link to the Patreon down in the description below. I like these little poems that are scattered throughout the book. On cold Mistin hills, beast witsome and fell. In holdings and havens the vassals adwell. Seers know the all, the start and the end. Myths hushed aloud, to which truth must bend. Aside vagabonds on snakeline trails, knights render these stories are wrenched from their veils. For the oath for the glory, through sorrow and ache, the city, the quest to which no knight can make. Because you'll go on many quests, but eventually you may have to take on the quest for the city, implied to be the city of Bastion in Electric Bastionland. Because maybe it exists in this universe, maybe it doesn't yet. Now, if you've played any of the Into the Odd games before, you'll be pretty familiar with how these rules work. This is the character sheet for the character that I am playing right now. This is Lucius, the Pearl Knight. As we'll see later on, there's lots of different knight classes, dozens in fact, that you can choose from. You can use these as PC classes or as NPCs. You have your three basic stats, Clarity, Vigor, and Spirit, and you're trying to roll under them on a d20 to pass saves. You have an armor value, which soaks up damage, and then guard, which is basically your hit points. So when you take damage, you subtract your armor, then that damage goes to your guard. If guard goes to 0, it starts damaging your vigor instead. Every knight gets their own special ability. They have a little passion, which can recharge some of their abilities, like their spirit, when they do a certain thing in-game. It kind of gets you more engaged with the fiction. We have a glory value up here. You gain usually just one glory at a time, so it's very slow, but it's going to rank you up into possibly being a knight gallant or a knight tenant, dominant, or radiant, where you can expand your influence and you can take control of holdings and you become a more important person within the setting. But probably the most interesting thing about the system here is the feats and gambits, the combat system. This is one of the rare games where the creator has created a new combat system, and I actually find it to be really interesting and fun to use. Basically how it works is you have these 3 feats, which are like special bonuses you can give to an attack. Like in all of the Into the Odd systems, you're not rolling to hit, you're just rolling straight damage. And if you have a bunch of dice that you're rolling against an enemy, or a bunch of characters are all attacking the same enemy, all you're looking at is the highest die of all of the dice that you roll. That's the one that's actually going to deal damage. Well, what do you do with all those other dice? Well, if you've rolled a bunch of dice that you're not using, because they're not your highest die, if any of them are 4 or higher, they can be converted into a gambit, which is really like a combat maneuver. For example, you can just do +1 damage, you can repel a foe away from you, you can stop a foe from moving next turn, you can impair one of their weapons, you could dismount them if you're in a tournament and you're jousting with someone, or you can do other stuff that you make up. So the more dice that you roll, the more likely you are to get gambits, maybe more than one gambit, and you can really knock them around the field and control what they do. Usually they'll get a save to resist this, but if the die that you rolled is actually an 8 or higher that you're using to spend on a gambit, then it becomes unblockable. How these feats work is if you want to use Smite, then you have to declare it before rolling an attack, and you add a d12 to the damage. If you want to do Focus, you use it after rolling an attack, and it lets you perform a gambit without having to spend a die. And with Deny, you use it after an attack roll against you or an ally within arm's reach. You discard one of the attack dice being used against you. But you can't use these forever. Every time you use one of them, you have to pass a save, or you become fatigued, and then you can't use feats again until you've rested. It's a pretty straightforward system, but what it does is it creates lots and lots of combat maneuvers that are always going off. And the more people are ganging up, the more dice you're getting from advantages or from weapons that use more than one die, then the more of these gambits you're going to get. I find it creates this very dynamic system. There's a scar system over here, so if you drop to exactly 0 hit points or 0 guard, then you can get a scar, like maybe you get a concussion or agony where your spirit goes down, or other things that change your character in a more permanent way. There are some basic rules for warbands where you can control a large group of people that act as one big unit. I actually used this in a convention game that I played where I was fighting a giant griffin, and we hired a whole group of archers that were firing these huge volleys of arrows. It was really fun to use. Our next section is going to be about creating the hex crawl that you are going to be playing when you run the game. But first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Under the Shadow of Hellfast Spire, a new Zine Quest collection of Shadowdark material by my YouTube pal, Bob Worldbuilder. This 64-page book has new classes, new monsters, new magic items, a hex crawl frontier, and even a centerpiece dungeon of the Coal Catacombs, which features some pretty unique coal mine hazards. It's a great package that gives you the classic starting town, wilderness, and dungeon combo, and then packs with plenty of weird, interconnected, and creepy encounters. Under the Shadow of Hellfast Spire is live on Kickstarter right now, so go check it out using the link in the description below, and tell Bob that Questing Bee sent you. Alright, so how does realm building work in this? One of the things I love about this book is that it assumes that you are playing in a hex crawl, and then it gives you concrete instructions on one page about how you are going to build that hex crawl. Part of your prep for starting a campaign is following these instructions, making a landscape for the players to explore across. It's generally going to be a 12 by 12 grid. You want to have a certain number of cities that you're going to scatter around. You're going to place a number of barriers throughout the hex crawl, which is borders of a hex that you can't travel through that force you to go around. This creates a lot more of variety in terms of how players are going to be traveling. You might think that it's a straight shot over here and then find out that you actually have to go around and travel through a more dangerous area. There's going to be 4 locations or holdings that people are living in, one of which is the seat of power. So there's going to be a power structure and a hierarchy kind of built into this hex crawl that you're going to have to maneuver your way through. 6 of the hexes have to be myth hexes. We'll see what the myths are when we get further on. There's a whole bunch of them presented for you. These are weird situations and problems that your players can try and deal with and gain glory by doing so. There's a bunch of different landmarks you can place around too. Dwellings, sanctums, monuments, hazards, curses, and ruins, each of which has a concrete game effect. And there should be 3 to 4 of each of these scattered around your realm. There's also this really neat little system for creating sites, which is like small locations, kind of dungeons, but they could also just be buildings or maybe an area within a forest that you can explore in a more concrete way than hex crawling. The suggested method here is you draw 6 points on like the corners of a hexagon, and you're only going to use 5 of those points to mix things up a little bit. 3 of them are going to be features, 2 of them are going to be dangers, and 1 of them is going to be a treasure. Then you connect them with lines. Some of these are open, 2 are closed, and 1 of them is going to be hidden. So just by following this little procedure, you end up with this little location that feels like it has all of the things that a good dungeon should have, although it's kind of in miniature. Of course, you could easily expand this to make it larger. The refereeing advice is, as usual, solid gold. Chris McDowell is very good at boiling down good DMing principles into these little bullet points that are very easy to digest and to remember. And fundamentally, it's all about moving things forward. You're giving the players lots of information so that they can make concrete choices, and then you are honoring those choices and showing the impact of how those things affect the world. This makes the world feel very interactive, like the players are big movers and shakers of the things going on around them. A little bit like in Pendragon, time is a big deal. The amount of time that passes per day matters for hex crawling, but you also have seasons that can pass that's going to affect the important events that are happening in the realm. Similarly, the life of a knight has 3 phases, young, mature, and old, which affects you mechanically and moves you towards eventually retiring and dying and passing on your legacy to your descendants. I really like this rule for travel. So when you're traveling through the wilderness, you're going to roll a die when you finish moving. And on a 1, you encounter the next omen, which is like a clue from a random myth in the realm. So you learn a little bit more about myths that you might want to travel towards. If it's a 2 or 3, you get the omen from the closest myth to you. And on a 4 through 6, you understand or you find what the hex's landmark is. So what does this mean? It means that on every wilderness roll, you're always learning something. You're always being given information that you can use to progress the game forward. There's even rules here for ruling your realm as a dominion and exercising your authority. Now, a lot of groups I think are probably just going to play things on a knight level and not get up to the dominion level, but all this is very gameable and very practical. I like how there's these little systems here that are always providing problems that you have to deal with. For example, at the start of a season, or when returning from a long absence, you roll a crisis roll, which could be a calamity, a dilemma, or maybe that there's prosperity. And every season brings some drama. Spark tables can help you describe this, but roll to see how you're involved in the recent courtly conflict. Maybe you're personally involved, or you're involved by association, or if you're lucky, you're not involved at all. There is quite a bit of prep that you need to do for this game, because you need to come up with all these different locations and people and so forth, but there's lots of random tables that you can easily pull from to generate that stuff. These are all spark tables, which means you roll once on each of these tables and combine them. So you want a new holding, maybe it's a fortified citadel. You want a new kind of bailey, it's a hallowed hall. Or maybe there's some news that has popped up and mercenaries are furious, and now you have to deal with that. There's also ones for generating lots of NPCs and for things that can happen in combat to shake stuff up. Now, the biggest section of this book is just the knights and the myths, and they look like this. Absolutely beautiful artwork on every page describing 72 different knights and 72 different myths. And remember, each of these knights can be the basis of a PC, or you can grab them and use them as an NPC that you run into. So one of the characters I played before is the Tourney Knight. You get a bunch of property over here, some basic armor and weapons. You have a special ability. This one says, Champion Vow, use immediately before combat where there is a prize at stake, plus d6 to melee attacks for the whole combat. So you're great at tourneys. You can restore your spirit if that gets depleted when you refuse a plea for forgiveness. This tells you which seer that you were knighted by. Seers are these really wise people scattered throughout the lands that give you lots of good information. So he was knighted by the Entombed Seer. Now entombed in white stone, their voice answers visitors only rarely. Always guarded by a knight, mourned by an apprentice, sees beyond the veil of death. And then on the facing page, we always have a myth. The myth is not necessarily connected to the knight. In fact, I don't think they seem to be connected at all. They're just there on every facing page. And each of them has a series of omens. So these are like rumors and clues that slowly build up over time. As you explore the realm, you might encounter more and more of these omens, which tells you more about this myth and how you might want to deal with it and the problems that it's causing for the realm. After the omens, there's always a section of a cast. That's all the NPCs and maybe monsters that are associated with this myth. And a really cool thing is that on the bottom of every one of these 2-page spreads is a whole bunch of these little random things. People, names, characteristics, objects, beasts, states, themes, dwellings, sanctums, monuments, hazards, curses, and ruins. And these bits of information are drawn from the knight and from the myth, but you don't have to use them in association with it. If you're in the middle of a game and you want inspiration, you want a character that's going to show up, or you want a place that they run into, you can just flip to a random page and just look at the bottom down here. So maybe you decide they run into a person. Who could it be? It's a wise farmer. And where is he staying right now? He's at a music camp. This is a really fun way to have inspirational material that's always at your fingertips. So you don't even have to flip back to those big lists of spark tables if you don't want to, because there's always something that you can grab really quickly on the fly on virtually every page of the book. Now, of course, one of the best features of this book is the artwork, which is all done by Alex Sorensen. And it has this wonderful, very mythic, very Arthurian, unified flavor. So it feels like this whole world has a distinctive feel to it. If you just take a picture of some of these pages and show them to your players, they'll immediately get in the right headspace. They'll feel the mood that this book is going for. One of the criticisms that I might have, though, is mostly on the myth side. Now, there's quite a few of the myths that are very easy to implement. It's a creature that's doing something bad. There's a guy with weird motivations. There's a problem plaguing the land that maybe you can deal with. However, sometimes there are myths where I'm not totally sure exactly how I would deal with it as a GM. I would find it a bit confusing. For example, this myth is just called the sea, and all the omens are of this ocean that's approaching. You start having a salty rain battering the land, or at the site of a modest pond, a new sea rises forth, its tide surging out night and day. After a bunch of these omens coming about, down at 6, it says, a wave swells on the horizon as tall as a mountain range. If it washes over the realm, then little can survive. After the devastation, the sea is quelled and returns to its rightful place. How exactly would I implement this as a GM? Honestly, I don't really know. Remember that each of these myths are supposed to be located in a particular hex. How do you have a whole ocean inside a hex? I understand that it's a myth, so maybe there's a bit of dream logic going on here. But still, it doesn't immediately present itself as a thing that can be solved. And maybe all of these myths aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they're just meant to be experienced. Or maybe you're supposed to do things related to them. Like as this ocean washes over the land, maybe your goal is more just to save as many people as possible. Sometimes there's a little solution built into it. Like there is a knight here who has a ring where if he is completely submerged in water, then he can command the ocean. But he doesn't know that. And if the players don't find that out somehow, then there's not a lot they can really do here. And if they don't find a way to directly deal with the sea, then it washes over the whole realm and basically kills everything. Or this one, there is a wall, but this wall is supposed to be the size of whole storm clouds. But it's only in one hex, and you don't really notice that it's there until you get to the hex. Wouldn't it be visible from across the whole realm? And if it's cutting through the land and guarding the land from invasion, as it says up here, then wouldn't it cover lots of hexes, cutting through the entire hex crawl? It's things like this that had me a little bit confused for some of them, while others are very straightforward. My overall impression is that some of the myths really are problems that you're supposed to solve, and others are more just weird events that you're just supposed to experience. And that's okay, I suppose. That is relatively Arthurian. A lot of Arthurian legends, the knights are journeying from one place to another and they just find a weird thing and have just a strange adventure involving it. And then I guess if the game master decides that, well, they've experienced it and it has resolved one way or another, then the players get glory because, well, at least they're still around. But I am much more of a problem-solving kind of guy. For example, one of the myths that I dealt with, as I mentioned before, was a wyvern that we had to track down in the mountains and defeat with a whole band of archers that we put together. And that was really fun because we had to think about where it was. We had to find a way to get to it. We had to come up with a way that would plausibly defeat it. It was very entertaining. And then finally, after all of these knights and myths, like I said, 72 of each of them, we get to a really fantastic part of the book, which is the Apocrypha. What this section is it goes through all of the major different sections of the rules, the different kinds of things that might happen in gameplay. Instead of giving you advice on how to do it, what it does is it gives you an actual example, a transcript of that part of play happening. And then right next to it, it has the game designer's thoughts about that transcript, what they would do, what they wouldn't do, just general commentary. So you kind of get a look inside Chris McDowell's head as people are playing the game. This is super smart. This is an absolutely great way to explain your rules and put them into practice. The vast majority of people out there do not learn how to play a role-playing game from reading a book. Virtually everyone who plays a role-playing game learns from watching it being played. And all of their tricks for game mastering and how to run a session come from watching game masters and hearing them talk about how they're running it. I really feel like something like this should become the standard in role-playing game books when it comes to explaining the rules. Yes, you should have summaries at the front that lay out all the rules in a very clear format, but when you have the game designer talking to you about why they made these decisions, what would be a good way to implement them, it helps solidify them in your mind way more than just reading the text itself. This is something that I try to do in some of my live play videos, where I did live commentary in the subtitles underneath the video explaining what I was thinking as I was running the game. But this is as close as you can get to that in book form. I love how all the Spark tables are reproduced in very small format, but it's all on one page. So you can just go to this page and pretty much grab anything that you need to know if you wanted to just invent something on the fly. And that is Mythic Bastionland. I'm really enjoying how Chris McDowell's designs are getting more and more focused, how the worlds that he's creating feel more evocative as he keeps creating them. But I think the thing I love the most about it is how practical it is. A lot of people dream of doing a big open world hex crawl where you travel from place to place and have adventures and you see strange things, but that often feels very intimidating. Chris makes it very straightforward to build that campaign world and then get adventuring in it right away. The rules for combat are both straightforward, but they're also cinematic and tactical. Lots of things happen. People get pushed around the battlefield. There's surprise reversals all the time. That's a lot of fun to play through. And the focus on time, where you can jump forward seasons or even years or ages of your knights as you move between sessions, allows this sense of grandeur to unfold, where the world feels like this huge place. And you can see the effects of your labors and the effects of your questing perhaps bear fruit over time, or perhaps fall away into nothing. I'm having a ton of fun playing in Mythic Bastionland right now, and it is a game that I would absolutely happily run myself. As usual, if you want to pick up a copy for yourself, links are in the description down below. And thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.